People in British Columbia may know you pretty well, but in other parts of Canada you may not be so well known. So please start by telling us a bit about yourself, Nathan, how you got into politics, what you did for a living beforehand, where you live, that kind of stuff, and then we'll talk a bit about the race.
Sure. So I grew up in Toronto and worked in South and Central America for a number of years, as well as Africa, and ended up eventually moving out to the West Coast and then further north into the place that I now represent as a member of Parliament in the northwest of BC. I ran a small business there for a number of years, doing conflict resolution, mediations, that kind of thing. Had a very good time being a small business owner, and kind of came into politics, without necessarily a strategy or plan. It was more of a calling. I think vocation is a good word for this stuff because you better be called to it. The work and the giving up of personal time and space is something that folks have to consider deeply before they get in.
Mm-hmm. You are in one of the more remote ridings of Canada, certainly in terms of distance from Ottawa. Tell us about your riding.
Oh, it's big and beautiful. It's bigger than Poland in terms of geographical space, and very diverse. It certainly a lot of primary resources, mining, forestry, fishing, that kind of thing, but also the next emerging age of our economy. So a lot of green energy and young entrepreneurs getting started, trying to find a healthier balance between the environment and the economy, not always sacrificing one for the other. So it's a place that is a bit at a crossroads. The traditional economies have suffered somewhat over the last generation or so, but new economies are emerging and doing things differently. It's also more than a third First Nation, so that's a culture and a history that I rely on deeply for the type of politics that I try to practice.
I understand that you're trilingual. How did you come to be trilingual?
Well, through a lot of the work in South America, I picked up Spanish because that was the language I needed to work and loved it. When I came back to Canada, I realized I had to do more because my high school French from Ontario wasn't going to do the trick. And since getting elected, I've been able to work on my French pretty steadily over the last 7 years.
So, because we don't have a lot of time, I think I would like to ask you about the leadership campaign. Why did you decide, as a fairly as I wouldn't say low profile, but a fairly new member of Parliament? I know you've been here since 2004, but you're young. You're one of the younger members of Parliament. Why did you decide to throw your hat in this race, in the ring?
While I'm the youngest candidate in the field so far, I'm also the one with the most federal experience. So I entered politics at a relatively young age, 30, but have been sitting as an MP for longer than anybody else. But I also practice a different kind of politics and thought I needed to test the waters to see if there was an actual appetite for this. I'm the only candidate that beat a conservative to get here, so I understand the need to find common ground with progressive voters, that we can't just stay in our bunker politically, be partisan only. We have to find different ways to reach out, and I've promoted some ideas in this race already that I think are very appealing to the 60% of the majority of Canadians who didn't vote for this government and who are not feeling reflected in the values of this government. So I think we need to switch the way that we do our politics. I think we need to try different approaches, and one of the best ways to promote that is from the platform of a national leader and see if there's an appetite for it, and if there is, then I think that takes us through to the next election.
A lot of people talk about new approaches to politics. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, I've made the proposal that there should be cooperation between progressive federalist parties so that in all currently conservative-held seats, we would give the local riding association the option of having joint nomination races so that anyone carrying a New Democratic card or Liberal or Green card, if the local riding associations agree, should be able to hold a nomination race together, have one person come out of that race, that person, that candidate, takes on the Conservative incumbent and hopefully beats them.
I can imagine how party establishments would respond to this idea. How are ordinary Canadians that you talk to responding?
Well, actually, some within the establishment are open to the idea. I mean, if it's okay to cooperate after an election, which we've done in the past and we've proposed for the future, it certainly is okay to cooperate before an election. And I'm sensing a whole new group of Canadians, progressive Canadians, who want into the conversation but aren't particularly partisan. They don't wake up in the morning worried about the Liberal Party or the Greens or the Liberals, New Democrats, I should say. It's it's an opening door for them, and they need the door open for them to come in.
Have you done any polling around this?
Nope. No. There's been some polling done. Often the pollsters ask the wrong question. They talk about mergers. They talk about other things. This is a very specific proposal. And there may come a time as the race goes along where more likely focus group it than poll it, because we want to talk to people of a political persuasion rather than just talk to New Democrats only.
What other examples of new politics would you like to introduce to the NDP and to Canadian politics in general?
Well, I think we need to take best ideas, right? I'll be releasing a number of platforms as the thing goes along, talk about different ways to approach our economy, approach issues like climate change, because our country to this point has been a dismal failure, and finding a way to have political discourse in that not everyone's turned into an enemy. You can have political opponents without having political enemies, and this gutter type of politics that's practiced by the current regime, I think ultimately is very harmful to the fabric of our country.
You mentioned that you beat a Conservative to get elected in '04. You live in a rural and remote riding, the kind of ridings that the Conservatives have done well in. And in order for the NDP to actually form government, it's going to have to win a lot of ridings like that. What do you think is the key to that?
Well, I think it's as much about going to our roots as it is to looking to the future, that we shouldn't typecast folks living in rural Canada. That I think the Conservatives do people in the West, people in rural ridings a disservice. We see the way they're handling the gun registry right now, talking about burning records and allowing more high-powered weapons into society. That's ridiculous. That doesn't represent the farmers and law-abiding hunters that I stand with. So this radicalization or this knee-jerk reaction that we see from this government does not stand well for rural Canada, and we have to make a different appeal. We have to appeal about those same pocketbook issues that affect people living in suburbia or the urban centers, how to put food on the table and keep a good roof over your head.
It's going to be a challenge for you as a young member of Parliament and a fairly new face in the party and somebody from such a remote area to actually run a national campaign and raise the money, I would think, to run a national campaign. How do you think you're going to do in that regard in terms of raising money and finding the contacts and organizers necessary?
Well, so far so good. We've been able to raise money. We've been able to get out to almost all the regions. We just have to hit the Atlantic regions next and the far north. But it's feeling good. I think people are responding. We're putting a call out to see if people are interested in doing things differently. We're trying to find a different way to respectfully communicate with folks and do it on a more individual basis. I've got another thing tonight here in Ottawa that's it'll expand the conversation, allow more people in the door, and let people know that the building of this country is all of our responsibilities. We can't just leave it to the party hacks. We need to have average, ordinary Canadians involved and pushing us forward, because we've fallen off track. This government's been able to eke out a win in the last one and get, with less than 40% of the vote, they get 100% of the power. And it's a disservice of our electoral system. That we need to change, and we will.
Today in the House, one of the issues that was raised repeatedly was the dependence of large numbers of Canadians on food banks. The government responded, "We have a job strategy, there's lots of employment, what are you people talking about?" The problem, as I understand it, is a lot of people are working jobs that don't enable them to eat or to feed themselves.
I don't think people are willingly going to food banks. I don't think they're doing it out of a pique or just a sense of fun. So if these jobs are good jobs and well-paying jobs, as the Conservatives claim, why are food bank numbers still at near historical levels? It doesn't. The circle can't square. But these guys have a pretty narrow view of.
You have a lot of experience in economic development. What do you think is a strategy for good jobs, not just Mac jobs?
Well, we have to make things again, right? Advanced economies make things. They don't export just raw material and buy back processed goods. Our country, whether it's energy or basic manufacturing of the resources that we do have, has been moving in the wrong direction. And the Conservatives somehow believe that the invisible hand of the market is going to make all those corrections and we're still going to have good jobs for the next generation. It's just not true. And it's already happening. We're replacing good jobs with bad ones, or ones that you have to work 2 and 3 jobs in order to keep the roof over your head. We can do better than that. The people that built this country up built it under the notion that this endowment we have, the resources that are in this country, should be used to grow and enrich the country, not sell it to the highest bidder at the most raw level. We can do better.
A somewhat related question is that the Conservatives and Stephen Harper have been taking aim at the NDP, now that the NDP is official opposition, as being in the pockets of big Labour. It's a related question because I think the Conservatives are trying to pit, to divide the population and between those who have well-paying unionized jobs and those who have these MIC jobs we were just talking about. How does the NDP respond to these attacks on organized labor?
Well, I mean, two things. One is the reason I entered the race wasn't just to beat Harper, but the way he does politics. Wedging one group of Canadians against another one shouldn't be the first priority of any prime minister. He should leave the country better than he found it, and this prime minister can't say that. I think in terms of him attacking organized labor and taking away some of the most basic rights of negotiation is foolhardy, because it takes away the lessons that we've learned, hard lessons, that you want good mediation, you want good negotiations to stay away from disruptive strikes. This government's stripping those powers from unions. It will only radicalize them, unfortunately.
I understand that you have to go very soon.
Yes, I have to speak in the House in just a few minutes. So.
Okay, you've got 5 months before convention. What is the next 5 months going to look like for you? Final question.
Yeah, hitting the roads and hitting the internet. We're going to have we already have a very good social media campaign, and it's going to only get better. But you can't replace getting out on the doorsteps and going, community to community and finding out what progressive Canadians want and seeing if what we are offering is of interest to them.